We all want to change our lives, earn more, live better, feel in control. But here's the truth. Nothing really changes until your mind does. If you've ever felt stuck, distracted, or like your own thoughts are controlling you, you're not alone. Let me introduce you to how to train your mind to obey you. Why your mind resists you and how to take back control. Your mind resists you because, at its core, it is not designed to make you happy or successful. It is designed to keep you safe. This means it defaults to comfort, predictability, and familiarity, even if those patterns are harmful or limiting. The moment you try to break free from old habits, set a new goal, or demand more from yourself, your mind often pushes back. It doesn't do this because it hates you. It does it because it's trying to protect you from perceived danger, whether that danger is discomfort, failure, embarrassment, or the unknown. But in doing so, it often becomes your greatest barrier to growth. This resistance shows up in many forms: procrastination, negative self-talk, avoidance, overthinking, excuses, and even physical fatigue that suddenly appears when it's time to do something meaningful. These aren't just bad habits. They're defense mechanisms. Your mind would rather keep you in a known, controllable state than risk the instability of change, even if that change is good for you. It confuses challenge with threat and effort with pain. As a result, any attempt to discipline your mind is met with subtle rebellion. But here's the truth. Your mind is powerful, and it will serve the one who trains it. The problem is, most people let their mind train them. They become slaves to moods, urges, impulses, and distractions. They wait to feel like it before taking action. And when discomfort arises, they take it as a sign to stop instead of a signal to push through. The key to taking back control is recognizing that your thoughts are not commands, they're just suggestions. You can hear them, question them, and choose differently. Taking back control starts with awareness. You must catch your mind in the act of resisting. This means observing your own mental patterns, not with judgment, but with curiosity. When you say you'll wake up early, but hit snooze, what's the story your mind tells you in that moment? When you avoid starting a project, what fear is your mind trying to protect you from? The more you understand the logic behind your resistance, the easier it becomes to override it. Next comes interruption. The most powerful tool you have is action in defiance of resistance. You must prove to your mind that it no longer controls the steering wheel. This doesn't require grand gestures. It begins with small, intentional decisions. Stand up when you don't feel like it. Speak the truth when your mind says, stay quiet. Do 5 minutes of work when your mind screams, there's no point. Every time you act despite resistance, you chip away at the old programming. Repetition turns these acts of defiance into a new identity. The more often you take control, the more your mind begins to adapt. It starts to see challenge not as danger, but as normal. It stops flaring up with panic and starts yielding to your direction. You're not silencing your mind, you're retraining it. You're teaching it that discomfort is not the enemy. In fact, it's the doorway to power. Taking back control is not about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming the one who decides. You can still feel tired, afraid, distracted, and unsure. But now, those feelings don't get the final say. You do. You decide what matters. You decide what to act on. And your mind, once wild and unruly, begins to listen. It becomes your tool, not your master. The shift is subtle but profound. You stop asking your mind for permission. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions. You stop treating discomfort like a red light. You realize that obedience is not suppression, it's liberation. Because when your mind listens to you, you are no longer at the mercy of circumstance, mood, or fear. You become the one in control. And from that place, anything becomes possible. The power of mental obedience in a distracted, reactive world. In today's world, where distractions are constant and reactivity is the default mode, the power of mental obedience has never been more critical. Everywhere you turn, something is competing for your attention: notifications, emails, trending videos, news alerts, people's opinions, and your own restless thoughts. The modern mind is overstimulated but undertrained. Most people live in a state of mental chaos, jumping from one thought, one task, one emotion to the next, without clarity, control, or direction. In this environment, mental obedience is not just a skill, it is a superpower. Mental obedience is the ability to command your thoughts, direct your focus, and follow through on what you've decided regardless of how you feel in the moment. It's not about suppressing your emotions or pretending life is easy. It's about deciding what matters and training your mind to obey that decision. It's choosing discipline over impulse, purpose over distraction, and calm over chaos. And when you build this kind of obedience, you reclaim your time, energy, and personal power. Without mental obedience, your mind becomes a slave to external stimuli. It reacts to whatever is loudest, most urgent, or most emotionally triggering. A minor inconvenience can ruin your mood. A social media post can derail your confidence. A random craving can shatter your focus. In this state, you're no longer leading your life. You're just surviving it. And every time you let your attention be hijacked, you reinforce the belief that you are not in control. But when you cultivate obedience of the mind, something extraordinary happens. You begin to respond instead of react. You start each day with intention, not by default. You notice distractions, but you don't chase them. You feel fear, but you act anyway. You experience doubt, but you don't let it decide for you. This kind of self-command creates a quiet strength. You no longer need to force your way through life. You simply lead yourself with clarity and conviction. Mental obedience doesn't come naturally. It must be trained, just like a muscle. And the training happens in the small moments. The moment you want to skip the hard task, but do it anyway. The moment your emotions want to speak, but you pause and listen instead. The moment your mind tells you to quit, but you take one more step. These micro decisions are where obedience is built. Over time, they accumulate into a powerful identity. Someone who follows through, someone who is mentally sharp, someone who leads with purpose. In a reactive world, obedience also protects your peace. It filters what enters your mental space. It helps you distinguish between what's urgent and what's important, between noise and truth. You stop being pulled in every direction and start moving forward on the path you've chosen. This kind of control isn't rigid, it's liberating. It allows you to live more fully because your mind is no longer your enemy, it's your ally. Ultimately, mental obedience is not about becoming robotic or emotionless. It's about developing the inner strength to lead your mind instead of being led by it. It's about honoring your higher self, the part of you that sees long-term vision over short-term comfort. In a world addicted to distraction, your ability to hold focus, to stay grounded, and to act with intention is rare. It sets you apart. It creates momentum. And it gives you back something the modern world is constantly trying to take away: your freedom to choose. How this book will reshape the way you think, act, and achieve. This book is not just a collection of ideas, it is a training ground for your mind. Every page is designed to challenge how you currently think, interrupt the patterns that keep you stuck, and replace them with tools that build lasting mental obedience. By the time you finish, you won't just know more about discipline, focus, or mindset. You'll become someone who lives with clarity, consistency, and purpose. Because the goal of this book is not information, it's transformation. One of the first ways this book will reshape your thinking is by helping you realize that your thoughts are not the final authority in your life. Most people believe that what they feel or think in the moment is the truth. I'm tired, so I shouldn't work. I'm scared, so I should stop. I'm uninspired, so I'll wait. This book disrupts that belief. It teaches you to treat your thoughts like data, not commands. You'll learn how to separate your higher intention from your immediate emotion, and how to obey the part of you that is grounded, not impulsive. This alone will change how you show up in your daily life. You'll also learn how to reprogram your habits at the identity level. It's not enough to force new behaviors if you still see yourself as someone who procrastinates, gives up, or needs motivation to act. This book teaches you to step into the identity of someone who leads their mind, not someone who follows their moods. Through repetition, ritual, and real-world exercises, you'll start to think like a finisher, act like a leader, and build the reputation of someone who can be counted on by others and by yourself. In terms of how you act, this book will show you the power of micro-commitments and internal commands. You'll stop waiting for motivation and start building movement. You'll learn the 10-minute rule, the discipline loop, and how to create mental triggers that snap you back into focus no matter how distracted or discouraged you feel. You'll begin to act from choice, not from habit, and those small, consistent acts will compound into massive momentum. You'll also learn how to create environments that reinforce your intentions. This book will guide you in removing distractions, creating physical and mental boundaries, and setting up external systems that make obedience the easy choice. No more relying on willpower. Instead, you'll be building a life that supports your self-control. But perhaps most importantly, this book will reshape what you believe is possible for yourself. When you see how quickly your behavior changes with the right mental structure, your confidence will grow. You'll no longer feel like you're chasing success from a distance. You'll realize that it starts inside you. Now, with the way you manage your thoughts and take action, you'll begin to trust yourself again. And that trust will spill into every area of your life: your work, your relationships, your health, your dreams. In a world that teaches you to chase results, this book teaches you how to become the kind of person who naturally produces them. It's not about hacks or shortcuts, it's about reshaping your internal world so powerfully that your external world begins to shift in response. When your mind starts obeying your higher self, your life begins to align. That's the transformation this book offers. And once you've experienced it, there's no going back. You won't just think differently, you'll live differently. You'll achieve differently. Because you'll finally be in command of the one thing that changes everything: your mind. Chapter 1. Break the cycle of mental rebellion. Your mind resists discipline because it's wired for survival, not self-mastery. From a biological standpoint, your brain is designed to avoid discomfort, conserve energy, and seek pleasure, three instincts that run directly counter to the demands of discipline. While discipline asks you to delay gratification, embrace challenge, and act with consistency, your brain is constantly pulling you in the opposite direction. It interprets discomfort as danger, effort as unnecessary expenditure, and unfamiliarity as a risk. As a result, when you try to install new habits or pursue long-term goals, your mind pushes back, not out of laziness or weakness, but out of an evolutionary drive to keep you safe and unchanged. This resistance often shows up as excuses, procrastination, mental fatigue, or emotional friction. You say you'll wake up early, but when the alarm rings, your mind quickly generates reasons to stay in bed. You promise to start a project, but somehow, just 5 more minutes of scrolling turns into an hour. You plan to eat healthy, but your brain urges you to reach for the comfort of familiar snacks. These aren't random lapses, they're symptoms of your brain trying to return to its comfort zone. And unless you understand why this resistance exists, it will keep winning. Your mind is also a master of short-term logic. It prioritizes what feels good now over what benefits you later. It doesn't care about your goals next month if it senses stress or discomfort today. That's why discipline feels so unnatural at first. It requires overriding your mind's default settings. It means training yourself to choose what's right over what's easy, to act without needing permission from your feelings, and to commit even when your motivation is nowhere to be found. Part of this resistance comes from deeply ingrained neural pathways, habits that have been reinforced over years, maybe decades. Every time you've chosen comfort over effort, distraction over focus, or avoidance over responsibility, your brain has taken note. Those patterns become automatic, like grooves in a well-worn trail. Discipline asks you to carve a new path, and your brain resists that at first because it requires more effort, attention, and intention than the familiar route. There's also an emotional layer to this resistance. Discipline forces you to confront your limitations, your fears, your self-doubt. It brings you face to face with the parts of yourself that are inconsistent, vulnerable, or afraid to fail. And often, your mind resists not just the work itself, but the feelings that come with doing the work. It's easier to stay comfortable than to risk exposure or failure. But in avoiding these emotions, you also avoid growth. The good news is, resistance is a sign that you're on the edge of change. It's the psychological equivalent of a muscle trembling during a workout. That tension doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're challenging a system that wants to stay the same. And like any system, it can be rewired. The more you act in spite of resistance, the more your brain adapts. You start forming new associations. Discomfort equals progress, effort leads to reward, and temporary struggle produces lasting pride. Over time, the resistance softens, and what once felt difficult becomes your new default. Understanding your mind's resistance is not about blaming it, it's about learning how to lead it. You don't overcome resistance with sheer willpower. You overcome it by becoming smarter than it. You anticipate the pushback, create systems that reduce friction, and act before your brain has time to argue. You train your mind the way you'd train a wild horse, not with aggression, but with consistent, firm guidance. Discipline is not a fight against your mind. It's a partnership. Your job is to show your brain that discomfort is not the enemy, it's the path. That doing hard things doesn't threaten your safety, it secures your strength. Once your mind learns to trust that, it starts to obey. And that's when you unlock a version of yourself that no longer needs to beg for motivation because you've built something stronger, self-command. Identify thought loops that sabotage action. Thought loops that sabotage action are mental patterns that seem logical or harmless on the surface, but in reality, keep you trapped in delay, hesitation, or self-doubt. They are repetitive, often subconscious scripts that your mind runs to avoid discomfort, risk, or failure. These loops become mental traps, spinning you in circles of overthinking, second-guessing, or distraction without ever leading to meaningful movement. If you've ever felt mentally exhausted but accomplished nothing, chances are you were caught in one of these loops. The most common thought loops start with, what if? What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if I start and can't follow through? These questions masquerade as caution, but they're actually mental stall tactics. They convince you to pause, wait, plan, or gather more information instead of acting. But that pause rarely leads to progress. It becomes procrastination in disguise. And the longer you stay in the loop, the more real the imagined fear feels, and the harder it becomes to break out. Another powerful thought loop is perfectionism. It sounds like, it's not the right time, I need to be more prepared, or it has to be flawless. This loop is seductive because it feels productive. You tell yourself you're being careful, strategic, or detail-oriented. But in reality, you're avoiding action by setting an impossible standard. The mind convinces you that unless conditions are perfect, it's better to do nothing. Meanwhile, opportunities pass and progress stalls. Then there's the comparison loop. They're ahead of me. I'm too far behind. I'll never catch up. This mental spiral drains motivation by focusing on how far you have to go instead of where you can start. It traps you in a fixed mindset, making you feel unworthy of trying because someone else already seems better. In doing so, it steals your attention from the only place change is possible right now, with your own steps. The indecision loop is equally paralyzing. It sounds like, I don't know what to do. What if I choose the wrong thing? And, let me think about it a bit more. This loop tricks you into believing that clarity must come before action. But clarity comes through action. Waiting to feel sure keeps you stuck. Making even a small move breaks the mental fog and creates momentum. But the longer you think without moving, the more stuck you feel. There are also identity-based loops, internal narratives like, I've never been disciplined, this always happens to me, or I'm just not that kind of person. These statements operate like scripts written in stone, quietly convincing you that change isn't possible because it's not who you are. They feel familiar, and familiarity breeds comfort even when it sabotages your growth. These loops are especially dangerous because they don't just stop your action, they shape your identity. To break free from thought loops, the first step is awareness. Start listening to your inner dialogue. Notice when you're repeating the same fears, doubts, or rationalizations without moving forward. Don't fight the thoughts. Just name them. Call them what they are. Stories. Not truth. Not destiny. Just neural patterns you've repeated enough times to believe. Then, challenge the loop. Ask, is this thought helping me act or keeping me stuck? What would I do if I didn't believe this? Interrupt the loop with movement even if it's small. Start the task. Send the message. Clean the desk. Write the first sentence. Movement breaks momentum in the opposite direction. It signals to your brain that the loop is no longer in charge. Over time, when you consistently choose action over analysis, confidence grows. Not because you always succeed, but because you prove that you can move through fear, perfectionism, doubt, or confusion, and that self-trust becomes the antidote to every loop that once held you captive. Your thoughts will always try to protect you, but that doesn't mean they're always right. Learning to spot and interrupt thought loops is how you take back authority over your mind. It's how you stop spinning and start building. Because action, not overthinking, is what transforms your life. Reframe resistance as a signal for growth. Resistance isn't a barrier, it's a signal. It's the mind's way of alerting you that you're standing at the edge of your comfort zone. And instead of being a red light that means stop, resistance can be reframed as a green light that says, you're getting close to something that matters. The very moment you feel internal pushback, whether it shows up as fear, procrastination, self-doubt, or anxiety, is often the moment right before a breakthrough. But because we're conditioned to avoid discomfort, we misinterpret resistance as a warning sign, when it's actually an invitation to grow. Every meaningful change in your life, learning a new skill, developing discipline, starting a new habit, speaking up, letting go, leveling up, requires you to step into the unknown. And your mind doesn't like the unknown. It's unpredictable. It might involve failure, embarrassment, or effort. So the brain resists, not because you're incapable, but because it's trying to protect you. But growth always lives beyond that resistance. There's no transformation without tension. If it's easy, you're repeating what you already know. If it's hard, you're becoming someone new. When you reframe resistance as a signpost instead of a stop sign, everything changes. Instead of thinking, why is this so hard? You start to ask, what am I about to learn? Instead of backing away from fear, you lean in. Instead of seeing discomfort as a flaw in the process, you begin to expect it as part of the process. Resistance becomes a guide. It points you to the exact places your growth is waiting. This mindset shift turns obstacles into training. When you feel like quitting halfway through a workout or writing session, that's not failure, that's the edge of your current mental limits. And every time you push just a little further, you expand those limits. You teach your brain that it's safe to keep going, even when it's uncomfortable. Over time, what once triggered resistance now becomes your new normal. That's how you build capacity. That's how you stretch into a stronger version of yourself. Reframing resistance also neutralizes self-judgment. Many people assume that resistance means something is wrong with them. Why can't I stay focused? Why do I always procrastinate? Why am I afraid? But resistance isn't weakness. It's evidence that you're trying, that you're no longer sleepwalking through life, that you're doing something that matters enough to trigger your defenses. Seeing it this way turns resistance from a source of shame into a badge of honor. The more often you push through resistance, the less power it has over you. You start to trust that you can keep going even when it's not comfortable. You stop making decisions based on mood or convenience. You start recognizing that the greatest wins often lie just on the other side of the moments when you feel most tempted to stop. Resistance is not a wall, it's a doorway. It doesn't mean don't go there. It means pay attention, growth is happening here. When you learn to lean into it with curiosity instead of pulling back in fear, you gain access to your next level, and that's when your life begins to shift. Not because things get easier, but because you've trained yourself to keep going, especially when they don't. Chapter 2. Build obedience through micro-commitments. The power of small promises to yourself lies in their quiet ability to rebuild the most essential foundation of personal transformation, self-trust. While big goals and bold declarations may look impressive on the surface, real change begins with the smallest commitments, the kind no one else sees. When you tell yourself you're going to do something, and you do it even if it's tiny, you send a signal to your brain that you are someone who follows through. Over time, this creates a deep internal confidence that cannot be faked or outsourced. Most people have a damaged relationship with themselves, not because of one major failure, but because of repeated broken promises. They say they'll start tomorrow. They say they'll stop scrolling, wake up early, eat clean, journal daily, but when those promises are made and then abandoned, even subtly, the subconscious takes note. And slowly, without even realizing it, they stop believing themselves. They stop trusting their own word. Eventually, the weight of unkept promises leads to self-doubt, low confidence, and a sense of powerlessness. Small promises reverse that pattern. They are the seeds of discipline and the proof of alignment between what you say and what you do. For example, if you promise yourself that you'll drink a glass of water first thing in the morning, and you do it for 3 days straight, your brain begins to trust your intention. If you promise to stretch for 2 minutes a day, and you follow through, your internal identity begins to shift. You stop waiting to feel motivated and start acting because you know you will honor your word. The beauty of small promises is that they are manageable. They bypass the mind's usual resistance to massive change. Big goals often trigger fear or perfectionism, which leads to procrastination. But small promises feel doable, which makes them easier to start and repeat. The goal isn't to overwhelm your system, it's to generate momentum. One small promise, kept consistently, does more for your self-image than a grand plan abandoned halfway through. Another hidden power of small promises is their compounding effect. Each fulfilled promise becomes a brick in the structure of your new identity. You begin to think differently. I'm someone who follows through. I'm reliable. I'm intentional. And that identity starts to bleed into other areas of life. You begin taking yourself more seriously. You start trusting your instincts more. You stop needing external validation to prove your worth. The confidence that comes from integrity with yourself is quiet, but unshakable. Small promises also train your nervous system to stay grounded. Instead of oscillating between extremes, burnout from overcommitting and guilt from underperforming, you create a steady rhythm of self-leadership. It becomes easier to take action without emotional drama. You no longer need to hype yourself up or wait for the right moment. You simply follow through, because that's what you do. And even when you miss a promise, the recovery is faster. When your baseline is self-trust, a missed day doesn't become a spiral, it becomes feedback. You don't internalize it as failure. You correct, recommit, and continue. That resilience is born from the quiet power of promises kept again and again. The small promises you keep to yourself are how you reclaim authority over your life. They remind you that you are not helpless. That change doesn't come from waiting for a breakthrough, it comes from showing up on purpose, even in the smallest ways. And when you do that, consistently, you build the kind of internal power that makes even the biggest goals inevitable. Because when you trust yourself, you become unstoppable. How to strengthen self-trust one decision at a time. Strengthening self-trust is not about making massive leaps or accomplishing everything at once. It's about building a quiet, consistent relationship with yourself through every small decision you make. At its core, self-trust is the belief that you will do what you say you will do, especially when no one is watching. It is developed decision by decision, when your actions align with your intentions, your words, and your values. Most people don't lack the ability to grow, they lack the trust in themselves to follow through. That's because they've accumulated too many broken agreements with themselves. Each time you tell yourself you'll start the habit, finish the task, or resist the temptation, but don't your brain files that away as evidence that your word can't be relied on. Over time, this erodes confidence, increases self-doubt, and makes every future commitment feel heavier and more fragile. The good news is that you can rebuild self-trust, and it begins with one conscious decision at a time. The process starts with making fewer, clearer promises. Instead of overwhelming yourself with grand plans, commit to something small and specific. Not, "I'll be productive today," but "I'll work on this project for 15 minutes." Not, "I'll be healthy," but "I'll choose water instead of soda at lunch." When you narrow your focus and define your intention clearly, it becomes measurable and much harder to rationalize breaking. Once a decision is made, follow through completely. This is the most crucial part. The power is not just in making a choice, it's in finishing it. Completion builds identity. Each time you follow through, you reinforce the belief, "I can trust myself to finish what I start." It doesn't matter how small the act is. If you say you'll walk around the block, and you do it, that moment becomes a building block of integrity. The more often you finish what you begin, the more solid and dependable your inner voice becomes. But real life includes failures, and some promises will be missed. When that happens, how you respond matters more than the mistake itself. Strengthening self-trust means not using failure as proof that you're broken, but as an opportunity to respond with clarity and self-leadership. Own the missed step, recommit, and move forward without self-punishment. This builds emotional resilience and creates the internal message that I'm the kind of person who keeps showing you even when it's hard. Another powerful practice is checking in with yourself regularly. Before making a decision, pause and ask, am I doing this because I mean it, or because I feel pressured? Self-trust grows when your actions are aligned with your authentic priorities, not someone else's expectations. When you live according to your own values and needs, you stop performing and start living with purpose, and that naturally breeds trust in your own judgment. Also, notice the internal dialogue around your decisions. If your self-talk is filled with doubt, guilt, or criticism, it weakens your inner foundation. Instead, Speak to yourself like you would to someone you deeply respect. Firm, honest, and supportive. Encourage yourself. Remind yourself of past wins. Validate your effort. That positive inner voice becomes a reliable companion on your journey. In time, as you make and keep more intentional decisions, self-trust will begin to feel natural. You'll stop needing permission or reassurance from others. You'll begin to rely on your own voice, your own instincts. You'll start making bolder choices not because you know the outcome, but because you trust yourself to handle whatever comes. Strengthening self-trust one decision at a time is how you reclaim your personal power. It's how you move from hesitation to conviction, from uncertainty to clarity. And once that trust is in place, everything else a discipline, focus, growth becomes easier. Because now, you're no longer second-guessing yourself. You're walking in alignment with who you say you are. And that kind of self-respect becomes the foundation of a truly unshakable life. Using time limits and task shrinking to beat inertia. Inertia's resistance to movementus, one of the most powerful forces that keeps people stuck. It's not that people don't want to change, take action, or grow. It's that the starting point often feels too big, too intimidating, or too overwhelming. This is where the techniques of time limits and task shrinking become transformative. Together, they work to disarm the psychological weight of a task, bypass the mind's defenses, and generate forward momentum with minimal resistance. At the root of procrastination is often an exaggerated perception of how difficult or time-consuming a task will be. The brain, wired to conserve energy and avoid discomfort, registers this perception as a threat. It responds with avoidance. I'll do it later. I'm too tired. Or, I need more time. But the task isn't the real issue, it's the mental load attached to it. That's why trying to tackle a full project or change an entire habit all at once often leads to paralysis rather than progress. Time limits counteract this paralysis by creating a clear boundary that feels manageable. Instead of telling yourself, I have to write all day, you say, I'll write for 15 minutes. Instead of, I need to clean the entire house, you commit to 10 minutes of tidying. Time limits flip the psychological switch from pressure to permission. Your brain doesn't feel trapped in an open-ended demand, it sees a small, defined effort that it can handle. Ironically, once you start and the resistance melts away, you often continue well beyond the limit. But even if you don't, you've already won. You've broken inertia and trained your brain to move instead of stall. Task shrinking complements time limits by reducing the scope of what needs to be done. When a task feels too big, the key is to shrink it down into something laughably small, so small that it seems ridiculous not to do it. Instead of write a chapter, you shrink it to write one sentence. Instead of exercise for an hour, you aim for put on workout clothes and stretch for 2 minutes. The goal isn't to be lazy, it's to lower the threshold of resistance so that action becomes inevitable. You're not shrinking your ambition. You're shrinking the first step. The beauty of task shrinking is that it often triggers a snowball effect. Starting with one push-up often leads to 5. Writing one sentence leads to a paragraph. Making one phone call leads to the next. Your brain stops seeing the task as a mountain and starts seeing it as something already in motion. And once motion starts, momentum builds. Both time limits and task shrinking are about reducing friction. They work because they bypass the mind's default objections. I don't have time. I don't feel like it. Or, I don't know where to begin. Become irrelevant. You don't need to be motivated. You don't need to finish. You only need to start, and starting becomes easy when the bar is low. These tools also reinforce a deeper identity shift. Every time you show up, even in a small way, you prove to yourself that you're not someone who avoids, you're someone who moves. That self-image becomes more powerful than any to-do list. Over time, you begin to approach challenges differently. You stop waiting for the perfect moment and start making progress in imperfect moments. You stop fearing the size of a task because you trust your ability to chip away at it. Consistency always beats intensity. Big wins come from showing up repeatedly in small ways. Time limits and task shrinking give you a sustainable way to do that. They help you beat inertia without needing willpower or emotional highs. They teach you how to get out of your head and into motion. And once you master that, once starting becomes your reflex, you become someone who gets things done, not through brute force, but through smart, strategic momentum. Chapter 3. Install the command-response habit. The words you speak to yourself shape your reality more than anything else. Internal language, the way you mentally frame tasks, goals, and decisions, either drives you into action or drags you into hesitation. Most people sabotage themselves not through external obstacles, but through internal conversations that are passive, vague, or optional. They say things like, "I should," "I'll try," or "maybe later." These phrases leave the door open for negotiation. They imply that the task isn't urgent, the outcome isn't critical, and most dangerous, that you might not follow through. To build discipline and consistent action, you must learn to use internal language that demands action. This means using clear, direct, non-negotiable statements in your self-talk language that closes the gap between intention and execution. When your inner dialogue shifts from "I'll try to get it done" to "I will complete this now," your energy and focus change immediately. Your brain responds to decisive language with greater clarity and urgency because it eliminates the possibility of delay. Command-based internal language turns passive thoughts into commitments. Rather than saying, "I hope I feel like working out later," say, "I'm doing my workout at 6 p.m. No debate. Instead of thinking, "I need to get started," tell yourself, "Start now. One small step. Go." These aren't just motivational slogans, they are mental directives. They shift you from a mindset of hoping to one of leading. This approach is especially important when resistance shows up. The moment you hesitate, your internal language can either feed the resistance or break through it. If your self-talk says, "I'm too tired, maybe tomorrow," you'll spiral into procrastination. But if you say, "5 minutes, just begin," you're stronger than this feeling. You override the emotional noise and signal your brain to act. The words you use in that micro-moment can determine whether you move forward or fall back. Another reason this matters is because your subconscious listens. When you consistently use action-oriented language, your mind starts treating those statements as law. It stops questioning, doubting, or debating every decision. You start building an identity around decisiveness and follow-through. That inner alignment between what you say and what you do becomes a powerful force of self-trust and momentum. Of course, internal language doesn't guarantee ease. You'll still face discomfort, fatigue, and fear. But when your internal language is rooted in leadership instead of negotiation, you begin to act despite those feelings. You stop waiting for ideal conditions and start creating movement with what you have. Over time, this mental discipline compounds. You begin to internalize a new default mode. "I said I will, so I do." And that principle begins to guide everything from your habits and goals to how you handle adversity. You become a person who leads your mind, not someone who waits to be led by emotion. Using internal language that demands action is not about being harsh or robotic. It's about being clear. It's about treating your own word as sacred. When your inner voice speaks with authority, your outer actions begin to match. And that alignment between thought and behavior is where real transformation begins. The person who commands themselves consistently becomes the person who cannot be stopped. Practice instant execution. Say, do. Instant execution, say, is one of the most powerful habits you can build if you want to strengthen discipline, eliminate procrastination, and train your mind to follow your lead. At its core, it's about shortening the gap between intention and action. Most people live in that gap. They say what they'll do, think about it, rationalize it, delay, and often never do it. But the longer you leave space between decision and execution, the more room your mind has to resist, doubt, distract, or negotiate. Practicing instant execution shuts that gap down. This principle is simple. The moment you say you're going to do something, get up, start a task, make a call, drink water, go for a walk, you do it. Immediately. No debate, no delay, no waiting until it feels right. This doesn't mean you become rigid or robotic. It means you build the internal muscle of command, follow through. You train yourself to respond to your own words with action, just as a soldier responds to orders without hesitation, not because you lack choice, but because you've decided that your word matters more than your mood. The power of say, do lies in the way it rewires your brain. Every time you follow through immediately, you reinforce a powerful message. When I say something, I mean it. This builds deep self-trust, and that trust becomes a foundation for confidence, clarity, and momentum. You stop needing motivation. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You start moving because you've trained your system to respond. You lead, and your mind follows. One of the biggest reasons people struggle with consistency is because they hesitate, and in that hesitation, resistance grows stronger. Thoughts creep in. Maybe later. I don't feel like it. What if I mess it up? Instant execution cuts off those thoughts before they gain power. It replaces overthinking with action. And once action begins, momentum naturally follows. This doesn't just apply to big decisions. In fact, it's most effective in the small, daily moments, the ones that feel insignificant but add up to your identity. When your alarm rings, you get up. When you say, "I'll clean that up," you do it. When you decide to write a paragraph, you write it now. Every time you execute without delay, you make it easier to do so the next time. And slowly, that becomes your default operating mode. Of course, there will be resistance. The mind will protest. It will tell you to wait, to plan, to think about it more. But say, do is a discipline precisely because it goes against the comfort-seeking nature of the mind. It teaches you to take control in the smallest moments, which makes you more powerful in the biggest ones. You stop being reactive. You start being the one who moves, who builds, who follows through, not because it's easy, but because it's who you are. Practicing instant execution also minimizes decision fatigue. You waste less energy debating whether to act. You act. That clarity frees up mental space for deeper thinking, creativity, and progress. It's not about doing everything fast, it's about doing what matters without hesitation. Over time, this habit transforms your relationship with discipline. It's no longer a force you have to summon, it's just how you operate. You move, you follow through, you execute. And as a result, you achieve. Because success doesn't belong to those who intend to act. It belongs to those who act as soon as they decide. That's the real power of say, do. Override hesitation by shortening decision windows. Hesitation is the silent killer of progress. It sneaks in during the moments between thought and action, multiplying doubt, feeding excuses, and draining energy. The longer you leave a decision unmade, the heavier it becomes, and the more likely it is that fear, uncertainty, or inertia will take over. That's why one of the most effective ways to train your mind for obedience is to shorten the window between a decision and action. You don't need more time to think. You need less time to hesitate. Shortening your decision window means removing the space where overthinking grows. You teach yourself to move before your mind has time to talk you out of it. Whether it's making a phone call, getting out of bed, starting a workout, or hitting send on an email, give yourself no more than a few seconds between intention and movement. This isn't about being impulsive, it's about being decisive. Action trains the brain. The more often you act immediately after a decision, the more natural it becomes. Think of hesitation like a crack in the door. The longer it stays open, the more mental noise rushes in. Your brain starts negotiating, maybe later. What if it's not perfect? What if I'm not ready? But the truth is, you were ready right until you gave your brain time to doubt. By tightening that gap and stepping forward quickly, you bypass the mental fog and create momentum. One way to implement this is through the 5-second rule. The moment you think of something you need to do, count backward 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and move. This countdown interrupts thought spirals and shifts you from the thinking brain to the action brain. It may feel forced at first, but repetition builds reflex. Over time, you won't need to count. You'll just move. Another technique is pre-decision. Decide in advance what action you'll take when certain triggers appear. For example, when I wake up, I put my feet on the floor within 3 seconds. Or, when it's 7 p.m., I sit down to write without debate. By predetermining the behavior, you eliminate the need for decision-making in the moment. The action becomes a cue, not a question. This reduces friction and makes follow-through automatic. Shortening decision windows also strengthens your identity as someone who takes action. Every time you act quickly, you reinforce a narrative of decisiveness. You stop seeing yourself as hesitant or inconsistent, and you start viewing yourself as someone who executes with clarity and confidence. That self-image is incredibly powerful because it creates a feedback loop. Fast action builds self-trust, and self-trust makes fast action easier. It's also important to remember that not every decision needs to feel perfect to be right. Often, we hesitate because we fear making a mistake, but most growth comes from motion, not precision. You learn faster by doing than by waiting. When you shorten decision windows, you embrace progress over perfection. You stop waiting for ideal conditions and start shaping them through consistent action. This practice is about reclaiming your power from your own hesitation. It's about refusing to let indecision drain your momentum. In a world that encourages delay and distraction, moving quickly on what matters is a radical act of self-leadership. And when you consistently override hesitation with movement, your life begins to reflect that urgency, not rushed or reckless, but focused, intentional, and unstoppable. Chapter 4. Create an environment that enforces obedience. Your environment is not neutral. It either pulls you toward your goals or away from them. Most people try to change their habits, focus, or productivity without ever changing the space they operate in. But willpower alone is not enough to overcome a poorly designed environment. If you want your mind to obey you more easily, you must design physical and digital spaces that align with your intention, spaces that support your priorities, reduce friction, and make your desired actions the path of least resistance. Start by asking yourself, what do I want this space to help me become? If your intention is deep focus, your space should feel calm, uncluttered, and distraction-free. If your intention is creative flow, your space should feel open, inspiring, and inviting. If your goal is consistency in workouts, your space should make movement easy and visible. Too often, we let our environments be shaped by default rather than design. We end up surrounded by visual clutter, emotional noise, and digital temptations, and then blame ourselves for being unfocused or inconsistent. Designing space for alignment begins with removal. Eliminate what doesn't support your goals. This might mean clearing your desk of unnecessary items, uninstalling distracting apps, or creating separate zones for work and rest. Visual clutter leads to mental clutter. When everything is visible, your brain treats it all as potentially important. The result? Decision fatigue and split attention. Minimalism isn't about aesthetics, it's about giving your mind fewer things to fight against. Next, add friction to what distracts and remove friction from what matters. If you want to read more, keep a book on your pillow instead of your phone. If you want to journal every morning, place your notebook and pen on your nightstand. If you want to avoid social media, sign out after each use or move the app off your home screen. The key is to make the right behaviors easier to start and the wrong ones harder to reach. Lighting, sound, and even scent also play a role. A well-lit, quiet room with intentional background sounds, like ambient music or white noise, can increase focus and calm. On the other hand, harsh lighting, background chatter, or even the constant ding of notifications can fragment your attention without you realizing it. Design your space so that it gently pulls you toward the mental state you want to be in. Your digital environment matters just as much. If your desktop is crowded with files, if your browser has 27 open tabs, or if every ping on your phone breaks your flow, you're not giving your brain a chance to fully engage. Clean up your digital spaces the way you'd clean up a physical room. Organize files, close tabs, use do not disturb modes. A quiet screen invites a focused mind. There's also a symbolic power to your environment. When you enter a space that you've intentionally designed for a purpose, it signals to your brain, "This is who I am right now." A clear workspace says, "I'm here to build." A peaceful corner with a candle and a journal says, "I'm here to reflect." Your environment becomes a partner in your progress, reminding you of who you are and what matters. And the truth is, you don't need a perfect space. You just need a purposeful one. Even small changes, a chair facing a window instead of the TV, a phone kept in another room, a clean table at the start of your day can completely shift your focus, energy, and results. Discipline isn't just about forcing yourself to do things. It's about designing a life that makes doing the right thing easier. When your space reflects your values and intentions, your mind has less resistance to overcome. You no longer have to fight your environment. Instead, your environment starts working for you, and every decision, every task, every habit becomes a little more frictionless, focused, and aligned with the person you're becoming. Set triggers and consequences that reinforce control. Setting triggers and consequences is a powerful way to train your mind to obey without constant effort, willpower, or negotiation. These tools help you automate discipline by turning behaviors into pattern zones that are initiated by cues and followed through with consistent results. At their core, triggers and consequences are forms of mental conditioning. Triggers activate action, consequences reinforce it. Together, they create a feedback loop that strengthens your sense of control and accountability. A trigger is a cue, either internal or external, that signals it's time to act. When used intentionally, triggers remove the need to decide what to do because the cue itself prompts automatic execution. The simpler and more specific the trigger, the more effective it becomes. For example, instead of saying, "I'll work out today," you tie the action to a clear trigger. "When I finish my morning coffee, I change into workout clothes." Or, "When my laptop opens at 9 a.m., I begin deep work." Over time, your mind associates the trigger with the task, and the action becomes reflexive. You can also use environmental triggers, such as alarms, visual cues, or physical placement. A sticky note on your bathroom mirror might remind you to journal. A water bottle next to your bed triggers hydration. A clean desk triggers focus. These cues eliminate hesitation by removing ambiguity. They act as mental shortcuts, bypassing resistance and helping you slide directly into execution mode. But triggers only work when they're followed by consistent action, and this is where consequences come in. A consequence doesn't have to be harsh or punishing. It simply has to create a sense of meaning and accountability. It tells your brain, this choice matters. Positive consequences like checking off a habit tracker, celebrating a streak, or earning a reward can strengthen good behavior. Negative consequences like donating to a cause you don't support if you miss a deadline can create just enough tension to prevent slippage. The point is to attach stakes to your choices. When your actions have weight, you're more likely to take them seriously. If skipping your morning routine means losing out on something you value, even symbolically, you'll think twice. If completing your evening routine means earning a reward, like guilt-free relaxation, your brain starts linking discipline with satisfaction. The key is consistency. Consequences only work when they're enforced every time, without exception. That's what creates real behavioral change. Triggers and consequences also reinforce your identity. Every time you follow through on a triggered habit and receive a consequence that matches the behavior, you strengthen the internal message, I am someone who follows through. Over time, this becomes who you are, not just what you do. To begin, choose one or two key areas where you want more consistency. Identify a reliable trigger you encounter daily, like brushing your teeth, checking your calendar, or turning off your alarm. Attach a micro-habit to it. Then define a clear consequence for follow-through, a reward, a point system, a celebratory moment, and one for avoidance, lost privileges, a reset of your streak, a task penalty. Keep it simple, repeatable, and visible. Eventually, this structure becomes automatic. You stop negotiating with yourself, because your brain learns to obey the system. You act not because you're perfectly motivated every day, but because you've created a routine where inaction has a cost and action has a reward. Triggers make the starting line obvious. Consequences make the finish line matter. This method turns your discipline from something you try to do into something you default to. And that shift making good habits automatic and bad habits costliest, what transforms wishful thinking into consistent performance. It's what turns mental chaos into calm, intentional action, and it's one of the clearest paths to gaining true self-mastery. Use physical anchors to train mental response. Physical anchors are external, tangible objects or movements you intentionally associate with a specific mental state or behavior. Over time, they serve as tools to train your mind to respond on command. These anchors become like switches once activated. They trigger a conditioned internal response, helping you enter a desired state such as focus, calm, confidence, or discipline. In a world full of distractions and mental clutter, physical anchors give you something solid, familiar, and repeatable to ground your thoughts and direct your behavior. The reason physical anchors work is rooted in the brain's ability to link stimuli and responses. This is known as classical conditioning, the same principle behind Pavlov's dogs salivating at the sound of a bell. When you repeatedly pair a specific physical cue with a mental intention or emotional state, your nervous system begins to associate the two. Eventually, the mere presence of the anchor can elicit the response, even without conscious effort. For example, let's say every time you sit down to do deep work, you light a specific candle or wear a particular bracelet. After doing this repeatedly, your brain begins to associate that scent or object with focus and productivity. It becomes a signal that it's time to shift gears. Similarly, if you touch your thumb to your index finger every time you take a calming breath during stress, that physical gesture becomes a cue for relaxation. Eventually, the gesture alone can trigger the calm, even before you breathe. You can create anchors using any physical element, objects, gestures, postures, environments. A certain chair can be reserved only for reading or writing. A single outfit might be designated for workouts or creative sessions. A short movement like rolling your shoulders back or planting your feet can signal readiness and mental presence. The goal is to tie one consistent action to one specific outcome. The key to building strong physical anchors is repetition and consistency. You must use the anchor only for the associated state or habit until the connection becomes solid. If you always journal while seated at a specific desk with soft music playing, your mind begins to enter reflective mode simply by sitting down and hearing that music. But if you use that same space for mindless scrolling or stress-filled multitasking, the anchor loses its power. Anchors work because they are reliable and ritualized. Physical anchors are also incredibly helpful for emotional regulation. During stressful situations, having a go-to anchor can ground you quickly. For instance, carrying a smooth stone in your pocket and rubbing it slowly can create a calming ritual in moments of anxiety. Athletes often use anchors before performance, like bouncing a ball a specific number of times or clenching a fist with intention to trigger confidence and focus. You can do the same in your daily life to manage emotions or energize your mindset. Digital tools can also serve as anchors if used with intention. Setting a certain ringtone as a reminder to breathe, using a desktop wallpaper with a motivational phrase, or setting a daily alarm for gratitude journaling, these cues can become associated with mental shifts if paired consistently with the behavior. Over time, physical anchors reduce the need for willpower. They create automatic pathways to your desired state. Instead of trying to force yourself into focus or calm, you activate it. Instead of depending on motivation, you rely on training. And because the anchors exist in your physical world, they cut through mental noise and make behavior more accessible, especially during moments of fatigue or emotional overwhelm. Physical anchors are a way to reclaim control of your mental environment. They allow you to build bridges between who you are now and who you want to become, bridges that are stable, repeatable, and responsive. When used intentionally, they transform daily routines into rituals of power, helping your body lead your mind back into alignment every single time. Chapter 5. Train through discomfort, not just desire. Pain, emotional, physical, or psychological, is not the enemy. In fact, when properly understood and embraced, pain becomes one of the most powerful training grounds for mental obedience and personal growth. Most people spend their lives avoiding discomfort at all costs. They run from hard conversations, delay difficult tasks, numb themselves through distraction, and interpret pain as a sign to stop. But high performers, disciplined minds, and deeply self-aware individuals know something different. Pain is a teacher. It's a forge. And the moments that hurt the most often hold the greatest potential to shape who you become. When you embrace pain, instead of resisting it, you begin to view discomfort as data, not danger. Pain shows you where your limits are. It reveals where your ego is still fragile, where your habits are still soft, where your fears still dominate. Pain is often the alarm system that activates when you're brushing up against change. And instead of backing down, you can choose to step in to use the pain as an opportunity to train your response. Training your mind through pain starts with staying present. Most of us instinctively try to escape when discomfort arises. We reach for distractions, excuses, or self-pity. But when you stay in the moment, when you feel the burn in your muscles, the sting of failure, the ache of uncertainty, you begin to build a different kind of strength, emotional stamina. You teach your mind, we don't run anymore. We face this, we feel this, and we keep going. The mind is always watching. It notices when you back out of pain and when you stay. And every time you choose to stay, even for a moment longer than before, you stretch your capacity. You prove to yourself that you can survive hard things, and not just survive, but grow through them. That's when pain stops being a threat and starts being fuel. Discomfort is also a purifier. It strips away illusions. When you're uncomfortable, your real thoughts, fears, and beliefs rise to the surface. It becomes harder to fake confidence or pretend everything is fine. But that's not a bad thing. That's an opportunity. In those raw moments, you see what still needs healing, what needs strengthening, what needs to be let go. The pain reveals it. And by embracing it, you allow yourself to evolve. This mindset doesn't mean you seek out suffering for its own sake. It means you no longer fear it. You stop using pain as an excuse to retreat. You stop labeling it as failure. You recognize it as part of the price of becoming someone new. Growth hurts. Change disrupts. Discipline stings. But every time you embrace that sting, you step into power that most people never touch because they're too busy trying to stay comfortable. You also learn to trust yourself more in pain. When you push through the last reps in a workout, when you speak the truth even though it's terrifying, when you keep working after the motivation dies, that trust becomes unshakable. You realize, I do hard things. I can be uncomfortable and not fall apart. I have authority over my response. This practice of embracing pain rewires your identity. You stop seeing yourself as fragile or reactive. You start seeing yourself as capable, grounded, and disciplined. Pain becomes a signal to lean in, not to run away. And with every moment you choose to stay, you take back control from fear, doubt, and avoidance. You teach your mind that obedience is stronger than emotion, that progress matters more than comfort, that you don't just survive the fire, you are forged by it. That is the true training ground of the mind. Not in easy moments, but in the difficult ones you refuse to escape. Practice mental reps in hard moments. Practicing mental reps in hard moments is how you build mental obedience, resilience, and internal power, not when things are easy, but precisely when they're not. Just like muscles grow under tension, the mind strengthens under pressure. Hard moments are your gym. They are the places where your thoughts want to quit, your emotions want to take over, and your old patterns scream for comfort. And if you can stay present in those moments, and choose your response on purpose, you train your mind to obey you rather than rule you. A mental rep is a conscious act of control. In a moment when you would normally react unconsciously, it might be the decision to speak calmly when anger is boiling, to keep writing when you want to give up, to take one more step when your body is tired. Each time you do this, it's not just about the result, it's about who you become through the decision to act intentionally when it hurts. Most people wait for ideal conditions to practice discipline. They want to feel ready, energized, motivated. But that's not training. That's comfort. Real training happens when the excuses are loud, when your emotions are unstable, when your environment isn't helping and you still make the choice to lead yourself. That's a mental rep, not because it's easy, but because it counts. The key is to treat these moments like reps in the gym. A single push against resistance may not feel impressive in the moment, but every one compounds. If you keep lifting the weight of discomfort-tone thought, one breath, one action at a time, you build endurance. You rewire your brain to interpret pressure not as a threat, but as a signal. This is where I grow. This is where I train. Mental reps can be incredibly small, but incredibly powerful. When you take a deep breath before reacting to a rude comment, that's a rep. When you stay on task for 5 more minutes, instead of checking your phone, that's a rep. When you don't indulge in the urge to complain or spiral into negative self-talk, that's a rep. These moments are everywhere, and most people miss them because they're waiting for the pain to go away. But you don't need the pain to disappear. You need to respond differently within it. The beauty of mental reps is that they create feedback. Each time you choose intentional action over emotional reaction, you feel it. There's a sense of control, of ownership, and your brain begins to internalize, I am not at the mercy of this moment. I'm in command here. That repetition builds mental muscle memory. You become faster, calmer, clearer in the moments that used to throw you off. What's more, these mental reps build trust. You start to believe in your ability to lead yourself under pressure. You stop fearing hard situations because you've trained for them. You've proven that you don't fold, you focus. That when the storm comes, you're not scrambling for strength. You've built it, quietly, in the hard reps no one saw. This kind of training doesn't require hours of meditation or perfect conditions. It requires awareness and intention. Catch yourself in the next hard moment, pause, and ask, what response here would make me proud? What choice aligns with who I'm becoming? Then do that. Even for a few seconds. That's the rep. And every time you do it, your mind obeys you a little more. Your discipline gets a little stronger. And your identity shifts from someone who reacts to someone who responds with power. These reps create a baseline of strength that others will call discipline, but for you, it will just be normal. Because you've trained, because you've stayed in the fire long enough to grow, and because every hard moment is no longer a setback, it's another opportunity to lift the weight and become stronger. Build a mind that listens, even when it doesn't want to. Building a mind that listens especially when it doesn't want to's the highest level of discipline and self-mastery. It's one thing to follow through when you're motivated, well-rested, and emotionally balanced. But the real power is found in those moments when every part of you resists, when excuses feel valid, and when quitting seems justified yet you act anyway. This isn't about forcing yourself with anger or guilt. It's about training your mind to recognize who's in charge, and obey even when comfort, fear, or fatigue try to take over. Your mind is not automatically obedient. In fact, its default mode is self-protection, not self-discipline. It seeks ease, avoidance, and familiarity. Even if those things sabotage your growth, it will rationalize, delay, and negotiate. It will whisper things like, just this once, you deserve a break, or you're not ready. And unless you've trained it to follow your lead, you'll obey those impulses without even realizing it. To build a mind that listens, you have to create an internal chain of command. The part of you that decides the higher, intentional self must take priority over the reactive, emotional self. This doesn't happen in theory. It happens in practice, repeatedly. Every time you tell yourself, go, and your body groans, your thoughts protest, your heart pounds, but you move anyway, that's a rep. You're not just doing a task. You're proving that the decision maker in you has authority. This is especially critical in the micro moments. The alarm goes off, and everything in you wants to stay in bed. That's the moment. You said you'd get up. Now act. You've told yourself to work for 30 minutes, but your brain wants a distraction. That's the moment. You lean in. These decisions may seem small, but they forge identity. Each time you act when it's hard, you reinforce the message, my word is final even to myself. One effective way to build this internal obedience is through mental separation. Learn to recognize that the part of your mind resisting isn't the whole of you's, just a protective pattern. It's noise. You can observe it, acknowledge it, and then choose to act anyway. Say to yourself, I hear the resistance, but I'm not following it. I've made a decision. This pause between stimulus and response is where power lives. Another strategy is pre-deciding your actions in advance. When you make decisions while you're clear-headed and grounded rather than waiting for an emotional moment, you give yourself a structure to follow even when motivation fades. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Set the rule. When this happens, I will do this. Then, when the test comes, obey not because you feel like it, but because you already chose who you want to be. Also, practice finishing what you start even if it's messy, even if it's late, even if it's hard. Completion matters. Every time you quit halfway, you teach your mind that discomfort is a valid reason to stop. But when you push through heaven for just 5 more minutes, you build psychological endurance. You're training your mind to follow through, not bail out. Over time, the friction between instruction and action begins to fade. Your mind becomes more cooperative. The gap between I should and I did shrinks. You become someone who doesn't need hype or a perfect mindset, you just need a decision. You follow orders your own. And that consistency builds not only results, but self-respect. A mind that listens is a mind that serves. It doesn't mean you're rigid or joyless. It means you've taught yourself to move in the direction of your values, even when it's uncomfortable. And when your mind listens to your leadership even on the hardest days, you unlock a rare, unshakable power, the ability to live life on command rather than on impulse. That's when you stop reacting and start creating. That's when you stop surviving and start becoming. Obedience is not harsh, it's freeing. Obedience, in the context of self-mastery, is often misunderstood. People hear the word and imagine something rigid, cold, or punishing, like a drill sergeant barking orders or a joyless routine of self-denial. But true obedience to your higher self, the disciplined, intentional, wise version of you, is not harsh. It's freeing. In fact, it may be the most liberating form of living there is. Obedience frees you from the chaos of constant negotiation with yourself. Most people live in a state of internal conflict. Should I go to the gym or skip it? Should I work or procrastinate? Should I follow through or let it slide just this once? That constant back and forth is exhausting. It drains your energy before you even begin. But when you train your mind to listen and respond, not argue, not delay, not bargain, you silence that noise. You move with clarity. You conserve energy for action instead of wasting it on indecision. This isn't about becoming a machine or suppressing your humanity. It's about aligning your behavior with your values. It's about recognizing that the part of you that seeks comfort in the moment is not the part of you that leads to fulfillment. When you obey your own decisions, especially the ones made in moments of clarity and conviction, you live in integrity. And integrity is freedom. It means your actions reflect your priorities. Your choices line up with your goals. Your days feel coherent rather than chaotic. Obedience also removes the guilt that comes from broken promises to yourself. How often do we say, "Tomorrow I'll start," or "This time I'll follow through," only to abandon that commitment at the first sign of resistance? Each of those small failures chips away at self-respect. But when you practice obedience, when you do what you said you'd do, even when it's uncomfortable, you rebuild that trust. You no longer carry the weight of regret or the sting of inconsistency. Instead, you live light, clear, free. There is also peace in structure. Freedom isn't found in doing whatever you feel like. That kind of freedom often becomes a prison of scattered energy, low achievement, and constant anxiety. Real freedom comes when you know what you're supposed to do, you do it, and then you move on with peace. It comes when your days are designed by intention, not by impulse. Obedience provides that framework. It gives your life rhythm, order, and direction. And perhaps most importantly, obedience to your higher self creates inner stillness. There's no more arguing with your instincts, no more needing external validation, no more riding the roller coaster of mood and motivation. You simply act in alignment with who you've decided to become. That kind of living produces power, not loud, chaotic power, but deep, grounded power. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything because it's rooted in certainty. Obedience is not about forceps, about freedom from friction. It's not about punishment, it's about choosing peace over inner war. It's the decision to live by principle rather than preference, by intention rather than reaction. And when you truly embrace that, life doesn't get harder, it gets simpler. You stop wondering what to do. You stop fearing discomfort. You stop being at the mercy of mood swings or distractions. You become steady, clear, free. Obedience to your highest self doesn't shrink your life, it amplifies it. Because when your mind obeys your spirit, nothing can hold you back. Not fear, not laziness, not the noise of the world. You move forward not because it's easy, but because you said so. And that is where true freedom begins. The version of you that follows through is already inside. The version of you that follows through, the one who gets up early, finishes what they start, honors commitments, and doesn't quit when it gets hard, isn't some distant ideal. It's not a fantasy reserved for a future where everything finally lines up. That version of you already exists. It's inside you now, waiting for permission, waiting for leadership, waiting for you to stop treating your greatness like it's something you have to earn, instead of something you have to activate. We often think of discipline and follow-through as traits you're either born with or have to struggle endlessly to build. But that's a lie. Your brain tells you to avoid discomfort. In reality, every time you've ever pushed past resistance, every time you did something even when you didn't feel like it, every time you finished something hard, you were embodying that version of yourself. The only difference between then and now is consistency. That version isn't missing it, just isn't the one you've chosen to lead with daily. Your follow-through doesn't come from more motivation or more time. It comes from more alignment. The truth is, you already know what to do. You already have the instincts, the inner voice, the gut feeling that says, this is the way. The problem is that another voice, the louder, more comfortable, more familiar one, keeps hijacking the wheel. It tells you you're tired, that it's not the right time, that you'll start tomorrow. And every time you listen to that voice, the disciplined version of you is silenced just a little more. But it's not gone. You've seen glimpses of it, maybe in a crisis when you had no choice but to step up, or in a burst of inspiration when you executed without hesitation. That person didn't appear out of nowhere. That was you. The real you. The one who isn't ruled by fear, laziness, or distraction. The one who moves with intention. That version of you is waiting not for perfect conditions, but for you to decide that they get to run the show now. To unlock that version of yourself, you don't need to change who you are. You need to strip away who you're not. The self-doubt, the patterns of avoidance, the addiction to comfort, the belief that you're not ready. You need to remove the layers of excuses and fear that have piled on over the years and return to what's already true, that you're capable, powerful, and made to follow through. Start small. Prove it in the micro decisions. Get up when you said you would. Finish the task you've been avoiding. Say no to what weakens you. Say yes to what sharpens you. Each time you follow through, even imperfectly, you feed that identity. You shift from trying to change your life to becoming the kind of person who does. The follow-through version of you isn't the future. It's now. It's in the breath you take when you want to quit and choose to stay. It's in the 5 minutes of focus you give when your mind begs for escape. It's in the decision to act, not based on feeling, but based on who you said you are. You don't need to wait. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to decide that from this point forward, the version of you who finishes things is no longer a visitor, it's the one in charge. And once you make that decision, your life won't just change, it will align. Not because something new appeared, but because you finally let go of everything that kept the real you buried underneath. That's the power of follow-through. It doesn't create you. It reveals you. From internal war to inner command, your mind, your rules. Most people live with an invisible war inside them. A constant battle between the part of them that knows what they should do and the part that resists, delays, and negotiates. It's the war between desire and discipline, between comfort and calling, between the path of least resistance and the path of real progress. This internal tug-of-war drains energy, weakens focus, and keeps people stuck in cycles of frustration. But the goal of self-mastery isn't to eliminate the struggle, it's to end the war by taking command. That shift from internal war to inner command is what changes everything. Inner command means you stop asking your mind for permission. You stop entertaining the voice that questions every hard decision, that whines when discomfort shows up, or that tells you to quit when things get inconvenient. Instead, you step into the role of commander, not dictator, not punisher, but leader. You give clear instructions, and your mind obeys. Not because you're forcing it, but because you've trained it to trust your word. The battle quiets not through willpower, but through clarity of authority. You decide once and act accordingly. You don't revisit the decision when it gets hard. You don't let emotions override instructions. You don't get caught in mental loops that sabotage momentum. Inner command is what allows high performers, elite thinkers, and those with unshakable self-respect to move without friction. They still feel doubt, they still experience resistance, but they don't let it run the show. You train this command by eliminating optional conversations in your mind. When you say, "I'm working out today," and your mind says, "But I'm tired," you don't open a dialogue. You acknowledge the thought, and then you move. When you decide to work for 2 focused hours and distraction beckons, you don't rationalize. You return to the task, over and over. Each return is a rep. And with every rep, the mind learns. My job is to follow because there's a leader now. This doesn't mean your mind becomes silent. The thoughts will still come. The urges to escape, to complain, to delay, they'll still show up. But they lose power when you stop negotiating with them. When you respond with action instead of arguments. When you stop being pulled in 10 directions and start walking in one. Inner command is also a form of deep peace. When your mind listens to your direction, you conserve massive amounts of energy. You're no longer mentally torn between your goals and your excuses. You stop second-guessing yourself. You don't need to hype yourself up every day. You simply act because you said you would. That alignment creates a sense of stability, certainty, and clarity that no external motivation can give. To reach this level, you must decide that your word is law to your own mind, not suggestions, not possibilities, commands. And you follow them not because you always feel like it, but because you respect yourself too much not to. That's how the war ends. That's how you reclaim all the energy you've been wasting on indecision. And that's how you move from surviving the chaos in your head to ruling it. From internal war to inner command. From being your own biggest obstacle to being your own greatest ally. That is the transformation that sets you free, not by changing who you are, but by taking charge of what's always been yours to lead. Your mind, your focus, your life.